Welcome 325D and 325K grantees to the webinar on completing the Ed Grant Performance Report, or the Annual Performance Report for Continuation Funding. This webinar is about the APR, with a few reminders at the end of the webinar about the Annual Data Scholar Submission Reporting requirements. The 524B form is used by all Ed grants and has been approved by the Office of Management and Budget. Project directors must follow the directions in the Dear Colleague letter and Ed 524B instructions provided by OSEP. An email is typically sent out in January or February about the annual report. This is the cover sheet. This is usually filled out in part or in whole by another office, typically your business or grants office. For those of you who have others help you fill out the form, you should make sure they are clear about how to fill out the cover sheet correctly. Only the project director or someone in a leadership position in the project should be filling out Section A, which we will talk about soon, which deals with reporting on your objectives and measures. I'm going to discuss some specific items on the cover page. This is item 7. For first-year grants, the date is the beginning or the start date of the project through February 28th. So if this is your first APR and your project started on January 1st, you will be reporting on 2 months of project activities. For grants in years 2 through 5, it is the date from the end of the previous reporting period, so March 1st and the year, through February 28th and the year. The reporting period is typically from March 1st to February 28th. This is number 8 on the cover sheet. Your budget data has to come from your business or grants office, and they should be reporting expenditures through the end of the reporting period. For the indirect cost information, you should fill out items 9A, 9B, and 9C. You should check item 9A. For item 9B, fill out your typical indirect cost rate and the period for that rate. You should also fill out 9E, which indicates that there is a restricted indirect cost rate for the project. This slide covers items 11 and 12 from the cover sheet. These sections often contain errors. You should always check no for item 11A unless you are in your final reporting period. In 11B, you should provide the date for which your final performance report is due, which is 90 days after the end of your grant. Number 12 is where the individual signs on behalf of the institution, and this person is typically not the project director, but someone from your grants office. This next page is the executive summary. In the executive summary, you should provide highlights of the project's activities and the extent to which the expected outcomes and performance measures were achieved during the reporting period. So this changes every year. It is not the abstract of your project, but the progress that has been made by the project during the reporting period. Now we're going to talk about Section A, where your measures and the corresponding data are reported each year. You will probably need multiple pages of Section A. Each page starts with the project objective, and only measures related to that objective are put on that page. You will probably have multiple pages for each objective. The objective goes at the top, and you enter your project measures in the chart. In the project status chart, you will be reporting the program and your project performance measures. When you are reporting a program measure under an objective, you put the program measure in first, immediately followed by the project measure that aligns with it. Then enter in any additional project performance measures for the objective in the following rows along with the corresponding data. There will be some additional examples later in this webinar. In this slide is an example of what goes in the second column of the chart. You enter the abbreviation of program for program measures and project for project measures. I wanted to talk a little bit about the data reporting. You do not report any data for the program measures. You will notice in the example that 999 is entered in the target and actual data boxes for the program measure. You will also use 999 for the data for all program measures. In turn, you report data on the project performance measure that aligns with the program measure. For your project measures and reporting quantitative data, depending on your measure, you will provide either a raw number or a ratio and percentage in the target, and then the actual data for the reporting period. If you have no data to report, then enter 999 in the raw number column and provide an explanation at the bottom of the page. If you have incomplete data, enter those data and provide an explanation at the bottom of the page of why the data is incomplete. So what information should be included in the explanation of progress section? As just mentioned, you should include an explanation for any measure where you reported 999. You should also describe the data provided. For example, what data collection methods were used? When was the data collected? Are there missing or incomplete data? What was the response rate? Your project officer should be able to understand and interpret the numbers in the chart from your description in this section. You should also include additional information such as what changes in the data occurred since the last APR, what activities were undertaken to achieve the targets. If targets were not met, what are possible reasons? How will activities that failed to meet the targets be improved? If the measure requires the collection of qualitative data, do not include the measure in the table. In the explanation of progress section of the page under the appropriate objective, report qualitative data along with other information about how these data were collected, targets, and activities. This slide gives you an example of Section A filled out. The objective is at the top of the section. The first measure is a program measure, and 999 is entered into the target and actual field because you do not report data on the program measure. You report data on the project measure aligned to the program measure. So directly below the program measure is the project measure that is aligned with it. And below that is another project measure that is related to the objective. I'm not going to read these examples, but this slide provides just an example of the explanation of progress section related to the project measures in the prior slides. This is just an example of the type of information you can provide in this section. Instructions for sections B and C are provided in the instructions that you will be emailed, but I wanted to touch base on some important aspects. Section B is about the budget. As indicated, this section should never be blank. You should provide the following information: actual expenditures for the reporting period, provide an explanation if you do not expend funds at the expected rate, describe any significant changes to your budget resulting from modifications to project activities, describe any changes to your budget that affected your ability to achieve your approved project activities and/or project objectives. Do you expect to have any unexpended funds at the end of the current budget period? Explain why, provide an estimate, and indicate how you plan to use the unexpended funds or carryover in the next budget period. Describe any anticipated changes in your budget for the next budget period that require prior approval from the department. You should always discuss any budget changes with your project officer, so you should contact your project officer directly about budget changes and can summarize any approved changes in this section. In addition to providing the information I described in the prior slide, it is helpful to include a breakdown of expenditures in the reporting period. This slide provides an example of the budget categories you can include. This information is also helpful for you to keep a record of for your own project management. Should your project at some point be identified as having a large carryover balance, your project officer may request a breakdown of expenditures in each of the reporting periods. Please refer to the instructions for the information that should go in Section C. In this section, you can attach any protocols or other information. This is where you talk about any changes with the exception of any changes to the budget. You should provide a list of current partners and any changes and describe the changes you wish to make in the grant activities for the next budget period. Once again, you should always discuss any change in project objectives or scope with your project officer. In Section C, you should also include information on requesting changes in key personnel for the remainder of the current or next budget period. You would also include in this section any other relevant information about your project, including unanticipated outcomes or benefits. This slide is pertinent to 325D grantees only. In Section C, we are also asking that you include a list of scholar accomplishments during the reporting period. This request is part of OSEP's effort to catalog scholar accomplishments. An example of the type of accomplishments are provided on this slide, and please note the reporting format as well. 325D grantees should only include completed accomplishments. Do not include products in progress. We assume those will be reflected in future annual performance reports. Finally, in addition to reporting these in the annual performance report, please send the accomplishments as a Word document to your project officer. This will make our cataloging efforts quite a bit easier. There are thorough instructions on submitting your APR in the continuation packet. You will submit the report through G5. If you are submitting your final report, refer to the final performance report sections. They differ from annual reports. And contact your project officer for reporting requirements during a no-cost extension period. Further information on APRs is available on the OSEP Ideals That Work website. This is a reminder, if you have not already viewed it, that there is a recorded webinar on project objective and performance measures for the annual performance report for continuation funding. There are additional products to assist you, such as an APR example, an example of project measures aligned to the program measures, reminders for completing the cover sheet, which you may want to share with your grants or business office, and a blank template for Section A for creating a draft and record of your project measures. As always, you can contact your project officer with any questions. This completes the portion of the webinar on submitting your APR. However, the APR is one part of your data reporting requirements. You are also required to submit data for performance metrics regarding scholars that are used for reporting program performance measures and for tracking the service obligation fulfillment of your scholars. In the next two slides, we summarize these requirements as a reminder about your data reporting requirements in the Personnel Development Program Data Collection System, or DCS. DCS collects the following data. Grantees upload completed and signed pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications. Grantees enter contact, demographic, and training information about scholars. Grantees remind scholars to review and approve grantee-entered training information and enter employment information. Employers also verify employment information submitted by scholars. A webinar is available on the pdp.ed.gov website for grantees and staff who need training or need a refresher on data reporting. In addition, you can find responses to questions frequently asked by institutions of higher ed, scholars, and employers regarding program regulations and requirements pertaining to the service obligation on the website. If you have questions or need assistance with the system, you can contact the help desk by phone or email. This concludes the webinar on completing the Ed Grant Performance Report for the Annual Performance Report for Continuation Funding. Thank you, and please contact your project officer if you have any questions.